Who's going to
So
help
I
me
think we all
out
know
with
that
my
feeling
student
when you're
loans?
like, I can help somebody out, and it truly, it truly touches you.
Exactly, bro. It feels good. It makes you feel like a superhero. And who doesn't
Yeah.
want to feel like a superhero?
Yeah, I mean, they're like Captain America for student loans. Hello, listeners. This is F. Molina, and I got with me Chris Cavazos. How you doing, Chris?
Doing good, man. It's Thursday, almost Friday, ready to go for the weekend.
Hey, Chris, when you were going to school, did you ever have to go out and get any student loans?
My whole law school existence is based on student loans. My apartment, my books, my internet, my food is all student loans. Uncle Sam.
Well, I just thought you were born wealthy.
No, I'm not part of the Molina family.
So I was on the Texas Lawyers Facebook page, and they brought up student loan debt. And one of the names that they mentioned was Stanley Tate. And I quote, they refer to Stanley Tate as the student loan guru. So I looked him up and I'm like, oh my gosh, there is a lawyer who focuses on student loans. So the minute that I found out about him, I reached out to him and he is with us today. Hello, Stanley. How are you doing?
Chilling, man. Thank you for having me. I'm doing pretty well, man. It's a wonderful day up here in Kansas City.
And Stanley, can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Stanley Tate. I'm a student loan lawyer, and all that really means is like my entire law practice is focused on helping people solve student loan problems, right? And whether that be getting out of default, negotiating a lower payment, negotiating a student loan settlement, filing bankruptcy to try to deal with the student loans there to try to prove undue hardship or try to get rid of the loans or even leverage a settlement. I do all those things. So I'm like a full service, figure out what the hell to do to solve your student loan problems.
What made you want to start focusing on student loan issues?
Honestly, I had finished a clerkship, so I did a federal clerkship where I worked for this federal judge in bankruptcy, and I did a lot of stuff dealing with these huge debt cases with big companies that were able to get rid of debt. And then I was like, what do I want to do going forward? And I looked at kind of like going to work at a firm. I was like, I really don't like that. I like working with people. So maybe I should open my own firm. And I was like, what do I want to do? And I just came from the bankruptcy world. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll do bankruptcy. And then more and more, I saw that I had bankruptcy clients who had student loan issues that we weren't effectively solving with the bankruptcy process. So then I got curious about that and I started learning more about it. I said, you know what? There's a huge opportunity here because there's a lack of knowledge in the space of someone able to communicate it in a really plain English way and solve problems without just saying, oh, bankruptcy, or there's nothing you can do. And so that was kind of like the focus. I wanted to differentiate myself inside of a market, and I started focusing in on it. And I've been doing it since 2014 now.
There's been a lot of talk in the news and stuff that there is this balloon of student loan debt that's out there. Is it really as bad as the media is saying, or what are your thoughts?
It's hard to say. Number one, there's $1.7 trillion of student loan debt hanging out there, right? So there's a lot of people that owe a lot of loans. So it's not to say that it isn't a problem. There's some people who are in really bad situations who went to schools that were predatory in nature. They took out student loans. The schools lost accreditation. And so this person owes several $1,000s in student loan debt for a school that they received no benefit from. That school is shut down, all this other stuff. So there are those cases. But then there are a bunch of people like a co-host here who borrow student loans to become a lawyer, right? And they received a valuable exchange for that, but they still owe $100,000, $200,000 for student loans. But those student loans allowed them to go out and change the trajectory of their life. So is there a problem? Yeah, depending on how you look at it, there absolutely is. I think there's total room for reform on how we're doing it, whether that's going to be mass student loan forgiveness, whether that's going to be changing the bankruptcy code, or maybe it's changing how we calculate interest on these student loans, because some people have loans with rates of 7, 8, 9% of student of the interest that's racking up on these loans. So is there opportunity for change? Absolutely. Is it like the worst situation ever? I don't know. I tend to push back against that.
How many? I mean, if you know how many people are in default of student loans right now because of COVID or anything like that?
No, I actually don't have those stats off the top of my head. And with federal student, and let's be clear, let's back up. Like that 1.7 trillion, almost a huge portion of that is federal student loan debt. And there are people who are in default. There's like, I think they just did something where it's like the default rate was closer to like 30 something percent of it. I mean, I don't want to be quoted on statistics. I may be a little bit off there. But there's so many opportunities to cure default. So like COVID, yeah, people are out of jobs, right? Like totally happened. But the federal government offers programs that you can have a monthly payment based on your income. And if you're unemployed and your income is zero, then your payment on your student loans can be zero. The problem that we have is a lot of times is that the student loan servicers don't do the best job of educating the borrower on what their options are, or borrowers don't take it vested interest in dealing with their debt. They just assume that there's nothing that can be done, and so there's some tension there between like what ownership do you have over your loans to understand what your options are versus what you should be told by the student loan servicer. Because for the most part, I don't think there's a reason why someone should default on their federal student loans, because there's too many options. There's deferments, there's forbearances, and then there's also like these opportunities to get payments that you can afford based on your income.
That would be what income-based repayment plan, IBR, I think is the term.
Yeah, there's various there's various repayment plans based on your income. The big collective, we call them our income-driven repayment plans, IDRs. Inside of IDRs, there's revised pay-as-you-earn, income-based repayment, income contingent repayment. Which one is right for you depends on your financial situation, what makes the most sense. Now, the fact that there's so many different plans can be confusing as hell, and maybe we need to eliminate or reduce down the options so we can just have a cleaner process so it's not all that confusing. So there's ways to kind of help fix this problem without just mass forgiveness.
What baffles my mind, Stanley, is once I was looking at your website, I was like, holy smokes, you actually have options. I thought, like, I'm a lawyer, and I thought, you have no choice but to abide by those initial terms that you agreed to.
Well, but the thing is, you may not even be aware of what your initial terms are, right? Because when you're like 18, 20, 22, and you're signing this long document, and you're in a financial aid office, you're just trying to get through it. And it's like an electronic signature. So you're just signing something on this piece of thing that you don't even really read the entire contract to understand what all of your options are, right? What are all of your rights? And so you're going into it ignorant of the process, and then you're hoping someone can educate you along the way. And the only thing you can do is listen to the student loan service, to the rep, and you're relying upon them for your information. But the problem is the person you're talking to, they may not be all that knowledgeable about all the options anyways, right? And so you don't have someone who is dedicated to putting your interests first to know what are all your options, say, here's what you need to do given your factual situation. And that's where someone like me comes in at, where like there's a bunch of laws that support all these things. There's a contract. There's all these rights you have. My job is to understand how those rights, you can leverage those to put yourself in the best financial situation.
And Stanley, I have kids. Chris, I don't think Chris has kids or kids that he knows of. What's your thoughts about how expensive college has gotten? What recommendations can you give to people that are entering college, or parents who are thinking, should I get a student loan? Should I not?
Well, I think here's the hard part, right? You're sending off a teenager to college and expecting them to invest in their financial future by understanding what they want to do with the rest of their life. But they're 18, 19 years old. Like, when do we actually figure this out, right?
Chris is still trying to figure it out.
That's true.
Take out this debt, and I don't know what I want to do. And so that's the trouble right there, because should you be taking out this loan until you're actually sure what the rate of return is going to be on your on what it is you go after? So from my standpoint, for a lot of us, we may not even need to go to college right away. We may need to take a gap year to figure things out. We may need to just start off at a community college. When you start off at a school where you're automatically borrowing right away, you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball of saying this has to work out, because those loans got to be paid back, right? So, and if you like someone that takes 5, 6, 7 years to get through undergrad because you're trying to figure things out, you've racked up $30,000 in student loan debt before you even got started on your career. And that's crazy. So I would think, for one, you want to go to a school you can actually afford without having to take out loans, whether that be through grants, scholarships, any type of tuition assistance aside from loans. And two, I think I would be hesitant about taking out student loans until I actually had much more certainty about what my rate of return is. What will I expect to get paid for in this career? And then the last thing is, I would lean towards federal student loans over private student loans, generally speaking, because federal student loans are going to have a better repayment options based on your income. Private student loans, they're going to want their money as soon as you graduate, right? And they ain't going to give you no income-based repayment options. They're going to say, this is what we want, give it to us, or else there's nothing we can offer you. And that's kind of unfortunate. So I would lean towards federal over private loans if I had to take out loans.
I mean, don't you think in this country we have a big financial literacy problem? Really, that's the brunt of kind of what you're saying is, even before that leap year, gap year, is in high school, we need to start teaching kids, hey, this is what a credit card is. This is what interest is. If you get a loan, a car payment's going to affect you. I mean, I remember one of my classes, they taught us how to write checks, and that's not even useful anymore. So, I mean, isn't that really a big problem that I think you would suggest maybe as parents or as kids or young people is, hey, look into your financial future?
Yeah, I mean, it's the financial literacy is a huge problem, and there's a bunch of organizations that are dedicated to doing that. And so there's not a lack of information, but it's putting the information in the hands in a digestible way that I see as an issue, and also competing with the noise of everything, right? Because there are people out there that do good with financial literacy. Then there's other people that are trying to take advantage of you as well. And it's like, who the hell do I listen to? You know what I mean? So that there's so much noise and so much BS that it's hard to focus. So you end up not focusing on anything at all. And then you just go with the flow and see what happens. And unfortunately for a lot of us, we don't get serious about our financial future until much later on in life, when we're ready to get married, get a house, get a car. And then we're like, oh, all this stuff matters. Like this credit score thing that I had no clue about, it actually matters because my interest rate is crazy, or I can't get the car I want at the rate that I can afford because my score sucks, right? So yes, there's a literacy problem, but there's also a noise problem, right? There's just so much information that we end up just kind of turning our brains off.
Do you think it's also a problem of I don't know how to phrase it, but maybe a problem with predatory businesses, in the sense of, when my uncles and stuff were in college, they lived very, I guess simply, they shared apartments. They had, older apartments. And now you go to, here in Austin, and you see giant skyscrapers, apartments, nice condos charging $1,500 for a month for one room. And so it seems almost predatory in the sense of, hey, we know these kids are going to get the money from student loans to pay these big bills. And it seems like, hey, they're pretty much guaranteed by the federal government. We're not going to lose anything.
Well, I mean, I think there's that part, right? But there's a market for that because people are demanding luxury type items. They're like, I deserve to live like this right now, not that I have to sacrifice more, right? We have this conditioning that we should have everything right away. And there are also, on the other hand, companies and schools who looked at it to say, to be competitive, we need to have these type of housing arrangements. So there becomes this arms race with these campus amenities. And then when you have federal student loans, which there isn't a credit check per se, and you're going to get the loan if you qualify for it, they're just going to hand it out, then yeah, there's this seemingly unlimited source of funds that allows us to continue to increase the cost of education, where like the cost of education has not kept pace with inflation. It is superseded inflation by multiples. And it makes no sense until you look at actually the federal student loan lending process. There's no credit checks, and we have all these people that are told you need to go to school, and they're just this number that they're basically a stock. And they can get a certain amount of money for this person over and over again while they're at the school. So let's give them the better amenities so they keep showing up. And we can charge them more until they max out their limit on federal borrowing power. And then from there, they may have to take out private student loans. But what do I care? They're going to pay me because they're told they need an education. They need a degree.
And I think I remember in college, one of my friends, he got his student loan, and he actually bought, I mean, you're old enough to remember probably some spinners for his Malibu. And for the younger listeners, that those were rims that spun as you brake. I think the song was, rims still spinning, I believe was the quote on the lyrics. And I would get my bulk amount of money, and I was allowed to spend it however. Luckily, I was smart enough, and I accounted for my bills, and I lived conservative. But isn't that also maybe part of the problem is we're giving, 21-year-olds, 19-year-olds almost like a blank check, say, hey, go spend your money how you want. And they're just, maybe not doing the best financial decisions, getting rims, for example.
Yeah, but what do you do in that situation? Do you set the money up in trust for them, right? And so you're treating this 21-year-old as a child of sorts. Like, I don't know what the perfect solution is there, right? And it's kind of like the NCAA football championship, right? There's always a complaint about whatever model's being presented. It's like, oh, we're just going to take whoever's like the top two teams at the end, they're the champions. No, we're going to vote on it with computers. No, we're going to vote on it with humans, whatever. There's no perfect solution to it. So I don't know how you solve it, because you're saying this process we have set up, there's going to be loans, and there's going to be a refund check left over to cover whatever expenses. And they warn you about the consequences of it before you take it out. You may not listen to it or really appreciate it because you're young and super optimistic about your future. But what do we do with that money? Do we give it to someone else to put it in control to pay you? I guess. But then we're also saying you're old enough to drink and engage in adult behavior and do all these other things, but we also still want to treat you like a child.
And then again, it is a loan. So it's like, it's your money. Do with it what you want.
It's your money, right? So like, what do you do in that situation? Do we just eliminate for public schools? We just make all public schools free? Cool, maybe. But then that goes against kind of like how we think about America, even though like the whole kind of like socialism argument is kind of backwards, because K through 12 is paid for by taxes. So why shouldn't it be different for college?
As I heard with these federal grants, like if you don't pay them, the federal government, they're not like your average creditor. They can do certain things to you that your average creditor can't. Can you explain that?
So for student loans, for federal student loans, and are what we call conditional grants. So like, let's say you're on an ROTC scholarship, right? And that ROTC scholarship says, hey, we're going to pay for you to go to school, but in exchange for that, you have to give us X number of years of military service. If you don't give those years, then that scholarship converts into a loan. That's a conditional grant of money. Normally, if you satisfy the condition, you don't have to pay it back. With Pell Grant money, you don't have to pay it back, and that money just goes to you. Student loans, federal student loans, if you always have to pay it back. If you miss out on your obligations, so you fail to perform to your obligations, the federal government has superpowers. They can, without a court order, they can garnish your wages. They can take your tax refund, your federal tax refund. They can also offset your Social Security benefits. They can take that if you qualify for them, if you're in default. So long as you're not in default, the government, they can't take that money from you involuntarily. But as soon as you default, the government has the right, through administrative wage garnishment, through administrative collection procedures, to take money from you involuntarily without a court order. It is a special right for federal student loans. Private student loans, they always have to sue you before they can take any money from you involuntarily. And
that's always been on the books, though, right? I can't blame Donald Trump for that. That's something that's always been there.
Yeah, no, that's been there for years. So.
And Stanley, when should people consider contacting you at what point should they say, okay, you know what, I'm having some issues with my student loan. Now it's time to contact Stanley Tate?
Well, I mean, a lot of times the vast majority of people are calling me after something bad has happened. Ideally, you would call and get, instead of saying, oh, I'm calling a lawyer, look, I'm just getting a student loan advisor, someone to look over and tell me what's going on. Especially when we're talking about multiples of thousands of dollars that you have hanging out there. You would want someone that is a specialist to look at your loans and say, what is the strategy I should be deploying going forward? For instance, there are a bunch of public service workers, teachers, police officers, whatever, nurses, medical professionals at these hospitals that qualify for public service loan forgiveness based on a job. And what public service loan forgiveness is, you work full time for the government or a nonprofit, and you can get certain federal student loans forgiven. And so I have people, they're like, oh, yeah, I work for the government, I'm gonna get my loans forgiven. Turns out they had the wrong loans, or they didn't meet all the requirements of the program, and they just relied on their servicer to tell them, oh, you're good, instead of hiring a professional that has a fiduciary responsibility that has to work on their behalf to review the loans and say, actually, no, you don't meet the requirements. Here's what you need to do. So when should someone reach out to me? I think if you just want a second opinion about your loans to make sure you're on the right track, you should do that. If you're having issues where default student loans can't afford it, you should definitely reach out at that point, because you just want to understand what your options are fully, because you don't have time to be an expert on all your options. So just like I don't have time to be an expert mechanic, so I just pay someone to be the mechanic for me and do the job. Same thing with student loans. What's
really like crazy, Stanley, is that there's not very many people that do what you do, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I know all of the people that truly do this on a full-time basis. Because there's a lot of people that are like, oh, I do student loans, but really they're a bankruptcy attorney trying to drum up business. They don't fully understand student loans, right? So it's just like a handful of us, on two handfuls maybe, that really do this from a consumer perspective. And then you have like consumer advocacy groups that do it, like the National Consumer Law Center, the Student Loan Borrowers Protection Project, all these other things. But those are going to be like your nonprofit entities. As the actual like attorneys, advisors that really do it, there's just a handful of us.
Wow. And was there any event in your life or like any experience that just really like made you say, this is what like I'm going to do? Like the medical field. You know, you don't have to be a heart specialist. You can make way more money doing plastic surgery. What made you want to do this? Like,
dude, like it's one, I like complex problems, and student loans is complex as hell. And I like taking complex things and making them simple. And I didn't see, when I looked out at the industry of people that did that, a handful of people, I didn't see a person of color that did this. And so as a black man, I was like, I can do this. And I can do it in a charismatic, fun, laid back way where I can help people solve problems. And like, when you start helping people this and you hear when they call you, they're stressed out. Like I had a lady today, she's overwhelmed because she owes $250,000 in private student loans and she makes $40,000 a year. And she's like on tears as we're talking. And then after I tell her the strategy of how we're going to solve this thing and try to figure it out, the relief in her voice, and she was like, I can sleep better tonight because I know what we're going to do. Dude, like how the hell do you put a price tag on that?
So Stanley, so if people wanted to like contact you, how can they do that?
Man, the easiest way is to go on my website, tateesq.com. TATEESQ.com. There's a link to sign up for a free 10-minute phone call. Go ahead and fill out the form, schedule a phone call. We'll talk. And if I can help you, I say, yeah, I think we can work together. If I can't help you, I say, I can't really help you. Here's what I think you should be doing on your own. I try to shoot straight with people, and I'm not here to waste your time, and I don't want you to waste my time. So let's just get right to it and figure out how we can work together.